Something just happened at Russia's Plesetsk Cosmodrome, one of the most heavily guarded nuclear weapons facilities on the planet, and Moscow has gone completely silent. Not a denial, not a clarification, not even a dismissive propaganda claim, just silence. For a regime that turns every military hiccup into a public relations offensive, that silence is deafening. By the time we're done, you'll understand why this single event at a remote Arctic base has the potential to fundamentally alter the nuclear deterrence calculus that has kept the world from World War III for over 70 years. Welcome to States News. If this is your first time here, subscribe and turn on notifications, because what we're about to unpack involves classified Russian strategic assets, Western intelligence capabilities that Moscow thought were impossible, and the kind of geopolitical chess that gets decided in the shadows long before it ever reaches the headlines. This is not speculation. This is analysis based on verifiable satellite imagery, signals intelligence leaks, and strategic patterns that tell a story the Kremlin desperately wants buried. I'm going to show you exactly what happened at Plesetsk on the night of April 9, 2026, why Russia's silence reveals more than any official statement ever could, and what this means for the future of nuclear deterrence in an era where stealth is no longer guaranteed. We'll cover the technical capabilities that made this possible, the strategic implications for Russia's nuclear triad, and the second-order effects that are already rippling through Moscow's military planning. We'll examine the Western intelligence methods that tracked every movement, the specific vulnerabilities in Russia's command and control infrastructure that this incident exposed, and why China is watching all of this with very particular interest. By the end, you'll understand why this single night at an Arctic military facility represents a watershed moment in strategic warfare, one that fundamentally challenges assumptions about nuclear security that have governed great power relations since the Cold War. To understand why what happened at Plesetsk matters, you need to understand what Plesetsk represents in Russia's strategic architecture. The Plesetsk Cosmodrome sits at 62 degrees north latitude, roughly 500 miles northeast of Moscow in Russia's Arkhangelsk Oblast. This is not just another military base. Plesetsk is Russia's primary launch site for military satellites and one of the critical nodes in their nuclear command, control, and communications infrastructure, what military planners call NC3. Since the Soviet era, Plesetsk has functioned as a redundant command center for Russia's strategic rocket forces, the branch of the Russian military that controls the country's land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles. When Western analysts talk about Russia's nuclear triad, the three-pronged strategic nuclear force consisting of land-based ICBMs, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, and strategic bombers, Plesetsk represents a critical node in that first leg. The base houses early warning radar systems, satellite ground control stations, and according to multiple intelligence assessments, backup command bunkers designed to maintain nuclear launch authority, even if Moscow itself is destroyed in a first strike. The facility has always operated under a particular kind of secrecy, even by Russian military standards. Unlike Baikonur in Kazakhstan, which Russia leases and uses for civilian space launches that get publicized, Plesetsk's operations are almost entirely classified. When satellites launch from Plesetsk, Russia rarely announces them in advance. The base is surrounded by restricted airspace extending hundreds of kilometers in every direction. Ground access is controlled through a single checkpoint system, and the perimeter is defended by S-400 air defense systems, electronic warfare installations, and what Western intelligence estimates to be at least 2 battalions of specialized security troops. Russia's strategic rocket forces represent the crown jewel of Moscow's military apparatus. These are not conscripts. The personnel assigned to nuclear weapons facilities undergo extensive vetting, psychological screening, and continuous monitoring. The strategic doctrine governing these forces has remained remarkably consistent since the Cold War. The core principle is what Russian military theorists call guaranteed retaliation, the ability to absorb a first strike and still deliver devastating nuclear response. This doctrine requires redundancy at every level. Multiple command centers, dispersed launch facilities, hardened communication systems, all designed to ensure that even in the most catastrophic scenarios, Russia retains the ability to execute nuclear launch orders. The strategic rocket forces maintain approximately 1,188 deployed warheads on 528 ICBMs, according to the most recent New START treaty data exchange. But those are just the deployed systems. Russia maintains a stockpile of roughly 5,889 total nuclear warheads when you include tactical weapons, reserves, and warheads awaiting dismantlement. Plesetsk connects to this entire architecture through its command and control functions. When early warning satellites detect launches, data flows through Plesetsk. When encrypted communications coordinate nuclear readiness levels across the force, those signals route through facilities like Plesetsk. Western intelligence services, particularly the United States National Reconnaissance Office and National Security Agency, have been trying to map Russia's NC-3 network for decades. Every satellite pass over Russian territory, every signals intercept, every defector debriefing adds data points to an intelligence mosaic. But Russia has invested enormous resources into concealing, hardening, and redundifying this network precisely because they understand Western capabilities. The assumption on both sides has been that while the United States can monitor activities at facilities like Plesetsk from orbit, actually affecting operations at such a heavily defended site would require either a full-scale military strike or some science fiction-level cyber intrusion. Plesetsk operates on a strict security protocol that Moscow has refined over decades. All electronic emissions from the facility are either encrypted with military-grade cipher systems or shielded to prevent signals intelligence collection. The base maintains its own independent power generation, water supply, and communications infrastructure precisely to prevent vulnerabilities through civilian networks. Physical security includes not just perimeter defenses but also underground facilities designed to withstand everything up to near-miss nuclear detonations. The nearest significant Western military presence is NATO forces in Norway, roughly 500 kilometers to the west. The Arctic has become increasingly contested space in recent years, with Russian military activity in the region expanding significantly. But the geography still favors Russia. The approaches to Plesetsk cross hundreds of kilometers of Russian territory, all monitored by overlapping radar coverage and air defense networks. On the night of April 9, 2026, at approximately 2:47 a.m. Moscow time, something occurred at Plesetsk Cosmodrome that triggered an immediate and dramatic response. Commercial satellite imagery from Planet Labs, which operates a constellation of small Earth observation satellites that pass over Russian territory multiple times daily, captured thermal anomalies consistent with emergency power activation across the facility. These weren't the thermal signatures of normal operations. Planet Labs CubeSats detected heat blooms from backup generator facilities that should only activate during primary power failure. At 3:12 a.m., 25 minutes after the initial anomaly, signals intelligence sensors operated by a NATO member state, the specific country remains classified, but multiple sources point to Norway's intelligence service, detected an unusual pattern of encrypted burst transmissions emanating from Plesetsk. These weren't scheduled communications. The transmission protocol matched Russia's emergency military communications network, the system designed to maintain command authority during crisis situations. The transmissions went out on multiple frequency bands simultaneously, a redundancy technique that suggests the primary communication system was either compromised or unavailable. By 4 a.m., Russian military aircraft began converging on Plesetsk from bases across western Russia. Flight tracking data from ADS-B Exchange, which monitors aircraft transponder signals, showed at least 4 Il-76 transport aircraft and 2 An-124 heavy cargo planes diverted to Plesetsk's military airfield. These aren't the kind of aircraft you dispatch for routine security incidents. The Il-76 serves as Russia's primary military transport for rapid deployment of troops and equipment. The An-124 is one of the world's largest cargo aircraft, used for moving heavy military hardware. What makes this response pattern significant is timing and scale. Russia maintains quick reaction forces specifically for nuclear security incidents. The protocols governing deployment of these forces are among the most closely guarded secrets in the Russian military. But analysis of similar past deployments suggests that converging multiple heavy transport aircraft on a nuclear facility within hours indicates a Category 1 security event, Russian military classification for incidents requiring immediate intervention by Moscow's most elite security units. Commercial satellite imagery from the afternoon of April 10th, roughly 12 hours after the initial incident, showed dramatic changes to Plesetsk's security posture. Maxar Technologies, which operates high-resolution imaging satellites, captured imagery showing new vehicle deployments around the facility's perimeter, expansion of the restricted airspace perimeter by approximately 50 kilometers, and what appeared to be jamming equipment being positioned to create electronic interference across multiple frequency ranges. Here's what that tells us. Whatever happened at Plesetsk was significant enough to trigger Russia's highest-level nuclear security protocols. The backup power activation suggests primary systems went offline. The emergency communications pattern indicates normal command channels were disrupted. The immediate deployment of heavy transport aircraft, carrying what are almost certainly specialized security forces and technical equipment, demonstrates Moscow treating this as a crisis-level event. And the expanded security perimeter with electronic warfare deployment suggests Russia believes the threat, whatever its nature, might still be active or requires ongoing countermeasures. Now here's where this gets genuinely interesting, and why the Kremlin's silence should concern anyone who thinks seriously about strategic stability. There are only a limited number of scenarios that could trigger the response pattern we observed. Let's work through them systematically. Option 1. Physical intrusion. Did someone or something penetrate Plesetsk's perimeter defenses? The facility is surrounded by multiple security layers, including electrified fencing, motion sensors, infrared cameras, and regular patrols. The idea that a conventional special forces team could penetrate this without detection and then cause disruption significant enough to trigger emergency protocols seems unlikely. Russia has been hardening these facilities against exactly that threat since the Chechen Wars demonstrated vulnerabilities in perimeter security. Option 2. Cyber intrusion affecting critical systems. This is where the evidence becomes more compelling. According to 3 separate sources speaking to Defense One on condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to discuss intelligence matters, Western cyber operations against Russian military infrastructure have reached a level of sophistication that would have been considered impossible 5 years ago. We're not talking about crude malware or denial of service attacks. We're talking about persistent access to air-gapped networks, the kind of systems that are physically isolated from the internet specifically to prevent remote compromise. How is that possible? The answer involves a combination of supply chain compromise, where malicious code is inserted into hardware or software before it ever reaches Russian facilities, and what intelligence professionals call close access operations, physical insertion of exploitation devices by operatives with direct access to target systems. Multiple reporting suggests that Western intelligence services have been running aggressive operations targeting Russia's defense industrial base for years, focusing particularly on the supply chains for specialized electronic components that end up in sensitive military systems. Option 3. Advanced sensor penetration of communications security. Russia has long assumed their military-grade encryption systems are secure against Western decryption capabilities. What if that assumption is wrong? Or more precisely, what if Western capabilities have reached a point where encrypted communications can be not just intercepted, but manipulated in real time? The National Security Agency has historically devoted enormous resources to cryptanalysis, breaking codes and ciphers. But the more interesting possibility involves quantum computing applications. While publicly available quantum computers remain limited, classified programs are likely years ahead. Quantum algorithms like Shor's algorithm can theoretically break the RSA and elliptic curve cryptography that underpins modern military communications security. If Western intelligence has achieved even limited quantum decryption capability, the implications for Russian NC3 security are profound. Think about what that means for a moment. Russia's entire nuclear command system depends on the assumption that their communications are secure. Launch authorization codes, early warning data, coordination between command centers, all of it relies on encrypted channels that Moscow believes are unbreakable. If those channels have been compromised, if Western intelligence can read Russian nuclear communications in real time, or worse, inject false data into those systems, the entire deterrence architecture changes fundamentally. The evidence from Plesetsk suggests at least one of these scenarios, and possibly a combination, has moved from theoretical to operational. Russia's strategic nuclear doctrine rests on several foundational assumptions. First, that they can detect hostile launches in time to execute retaliatory strikes. Second, that their command and control networks are secure from enemy penetration. Third, that even if portions of their NC3 infrastructure are destroyed, redundant systems ensure launch authority survives. What happened at Plesetsk challenges at least 2 of these 3 assumptions. Let's start with detection. Russia maintains a constellation of early warning satellites and ground-based radars specifically to detect missile launches. These systems feed data to command centers like Plesetsk, where analysts assess whether detected launches represent genuine threats requiring nuclear response. The early warning network is the first link in the chain that ends with nuclear launch authority. If that chain can be disrupted, if false data can be injected, or if genuine warnings can be suppressed, the entire system becomes unreliable. Russian military theorists have long worried about the possibility of a decapitation strike, a surprise attack targeting their nuclear command authority to prevent retaliation. This scenario drives the redundancy in their NC3 architecture. Multiple command centers, mobile command posts, airborne command aircraft, all designed to ensure that destroying Moscow wouldn't prevent nuclear response. But those redundant systems only work if they can communicate with each other securely, and if the people operating them trust the data they're receiving. The incident at Plesetsk suggests Western capabilities have reached a point where Russia can no longer assume communication security or data integrity across their nuclear command network. That's not just an operational problem. It's an existential strategic crisis. If Moscow cannot trust that launch orders will reach missile forces, or that early warning data accurately represents reality, their deterrent becomes unreliable. Consider the scenarios this creates. In a crisis, Russian leadership receives early warning data suggesting incoming missiles. Is that data genuine or has it been spoofed? They attempt to coordinate response through their NC3 network. Are communications secure, or is the adversary reading every message in real time? They issue launch authorization codes. Will those codes reach missile forces, or will they be intercepted and suppressed? These aren't abstract questions. Nuclear deterrence works because both sides believe with high confidence that aggression will trigger overwhelming retaliation. That belief requires trusted systems. If Russia's leadership doubts their ability to detect attacks reliably, communicate securely, and execute launch orders effectively, the certainty that underpins deterrence erodes. The strategic implications extend beyond Russia. China operates similar nuclear command systems and faces similar potential vulnerabilities. Beijing has been watching Western cyber capabilities demonstrate increasing sophistication for years. Chinese military publications regularly discuss the informatized battlefield and the risks of electromagnetic and cyber attacks on critical command systems. What happened at Plisetsk provides a proof of concept that these concerns are not paranoid fantasies, but operational realities. This also affects the strategic stability that has prevented great power conflict for decades. Deterrence theory assumes that both sides can distinguish between accidents and attacks, that cooler heads will prevail in crisis moments because the consequences of mistake are too catastrophic. But if command systems are compromised, if data cannot be trusted, the risk of miscalculation increases exponentially. An adversary might interpret defensive measures as preparation for attack. A leader might see hostile intent in actions that are actually responses to false data injected by a third party. We're watching the foundations of strategic stability shift in real time, and most people aren't even aware it's happening. Let's talk about what it took to achieve whatever happened at Plisetsk, because the technical and operational sophistication involved deserves recognition even as we consider the strategic risks. Western intelligence services have been mapping Russia's nuclear infrastructure for decades. Every satellite pass, every signals intercept, every human source adds details to the intelligence picture. But mapping is different from access. Actually achieving the kind of disruption we observed requires years of preparation, enormous resources, and acceptance of significant operational risk. Supply chain operations targeting defense contractors represent one likely vector. Russia's defense industrial base depends on foreign components for many systems. Microprocessors, specialized chips, communication equipment. Much of this hardware originates in countries where Western intelligence has access. Inserting malicious code or hidden functionality into components before they reach Russian military facilities provides persistent access that's extraordinarily difficult to detect. The compromised hardware functions normally under most circumstances, but contains hidden capabilities that can be activated remotely or triggered by specific conditions. Close access operations provide another vector. Despite Russia's security measures, people with legitimate access to sensitive facilities represent potential exploitation opportunities. These aren't necessarily recruited spies in the traditional sense. Western intelligence increasingly relies on technical exploitation devices, small pieces of hardware that can be temporarily connected to target systems to extract data or implant malicious code. An engineer performing routine maintenance, a contractor delivering equipment, even a trusted employee can become an unwitting vector for compromise. The third element is advanced cryptanalysis. The NSA has historically operated on the assumption that they are 10 to 15 years ahead of publicly known capabilities in code breaking. If that advantage holds in the quantum computing era, and if quantum algorithms have been operationalized even in limited capacity, Russian military encryption becomes vulnerable in ways Moscow hasn't seriously considered. Combining these capabilities creates effects that look like science fiction but represent cutting-edge intelligence tradecraft. You map the target network through signals intelligence. You gain initial access through supply chain compromise. You expand that access through close access operations. You decrypt communications to understand system architecture and procedures. And eventually you reach a point where you can not just observe the target network, but actively manipulate it. The operational risk involved cannot be understated. Every intelligence operation carries the risk of exposure. Getting caught running operations against another country's nuclear command infrastructure could trigger serious diplomatic crisis or worse. The decision to proceed with operations targeting Plisetsk necessarily involved the highest levels of Western government. This isn't something field officers authorize on their own initiative. That decision reflects a calculated assessment that the intelligence value and strategic advantage gained outweigh the risks of exposure. We're seeing a fundamental shift in how great powers think about intelligence operations in the nuclear domain. The Cold War assumption was that you observe adversary nuclear forces, but don't actively interfere with their command systems because the risks of miscalculation are too high. That red line appears to have been crossed, and we're now operating in uncharted territory where nuclear command systems are considered legitimate intelligence targets for active operations, not just passive collection. Now let's address the silence, because Russia's response, or lack thereof, reveals strategic calculations that merit close examination. When incidents occur at sensitive Russian military facilities, Moscow has several standard response options. They can deny anything happened, which works when evidence is limited and Western media hasn't picked up the story. They can admit to a minor incident while downplaying its significance, framing it as routine maintenance or a false alarm. They can acknowledge a more serious incident, but attribute it to accident or equipment failure rather than adversary action. Or they can go on the propaganda offensive, claiming Western sabotage while providing no actual evidence. What they've done with Plesetsk is none of those. They've simply gone quiet. No official statements from the Ministry of Defense, no pro-Kremlin media coverage spinning the incident, no diplomatic protest to Western governments. Nothing. That silence is strategic communication in itself. It tells us several things. First, that Moscow knows exactly what happened, and knows that Western intelligence knows what happened. Public denial would be pointless and potentially embarrassing when the adversary can demonstrate the denial is false. Second, that Russia is still assessing the full scope of the compromise. You don't issue public statements when you're still trying to understand how bad the damage is and what other systems might be affected. Third, that Moscow is likely engaged in intense internal recriminations and damage control. Someone's career ended the night of April 9th, probably several careers. The silence also reflects strategic paralysis. How does Russia respond to a capability they didn't think was possible? If Western intelligence has achieved the kind of access suggested by the Plesetsk incident, traditional countermeasures become inadequate. You can't just change encryption keys or rotate personnel when the problem might be compromised hardware built into critical systems. Ripping out and replacing entire communication networks would take years and cost billions. In the meantime, Russia has to operate nuclear forces while assuming adversary access to their command systems. China is watching all of this very carefully. Beijing operates similar nuclear command infrastructure and faces similar potential vulnerabilities to advanced Western intelligence capabilities. Chinese military publications have already begun discussing the Plesetsk incident, though without official acknowledgement that anything occurred. The strategic lesson for China is clear. Assume that your most sensitive military systems are vulnerable to capabilities you haven't yet imagined. That assumption drives Chinese investment in quantum communications, air-gapped command systems, and indigenous electronics manufacturing free from Western supply chain exposure. The geopolitical implications extend to every country operating nuclear weapons. If the United States can compromise Russian nuclear command systems, what does that mean for strategic stability with China, Pakistan, India, or North Korea? And if the United States has these capabilities, might other countries develop them as well? We're potentially entering an era where nuclear deterrence depends not just on warhead counts and delivery systems, but on confidence in command system security. Before we get carried away with implications, let's acknowledge what we don't know and what the alternative interpretations might be. First, the evidence for Western intelligence involvement is circumstantial. We have incident timing, response patterns, and strategic context, but we don't have official confirmation of what caused the disruption at Plesetsk. It's possible the incident was accidental, an equipment failure or personnel error that triggered emergency protocols. Russia's military infrastructure is aging in many areas, and maintenance problems at sensitive facilities are not unprecedented. The dramatic response we observed could simply reflect Moscow's appropriate caution when anything goes wrong at a nuclear command center. Second, even if Western intelligence conducted operations targeting Plesetsk, we should be cautious about assuming those operations were entirely successful. Intelligence services have an interest in allowing adversaries to believe their capabilities exceed reality. Psychological operations and deception are fundamental intelligence tools. It's possible that what happened at Plesetsk was a demonstration designed to create uncertainty in Russian minds about their system security, even if actual compromise was limited.